Well, class, we're going to pick up where we were and talk about kind of the second big category of informal fallacies, and that's the fallacies of ambiguity. And these fallacies arise from the ambiguous use of words or phrases and premises or in the conclusion of an argument. Kind of have four basic ones: equivocation, amphibly, composition, and division. And so this is key and important in getting our terms right in the arguments that we use in dialogue with other people. That's why it's important to lay down definitions if you need to get clarity, because fallacious reasoning can happen, and breakdown in communication and persuasion can happen when we're confused on the words that each one is using in a dialogue with another person, and with obviously within our own arguments themselves. And so the first one is equivocation. It occurs when two or more meanings of a word or phrase are used in a context in which validity requires a single meaning of that word. So this, it's about the content of the argument, but really is affected by a deductive aspect of arguments. The validity of arguments is dependent on the univocal usage of a word through an argument rather than an equivocal. And so example could be, only man is rational, but no woman is a man, therefore no woman is rational. So this is this is equivocation on the use of the word man, when it seems that upon more analysis, the word human is what human being, species, human being, a member of the human family, a man or a woman is what is meant in the first premise. Only man or only human is rational, because then the second premise would be false. But no woman is a human, therefore no woman is rational. So it's an equivocation on the word man. So the way it's kind of structured, the fallacy works, is that the premises contain a key word or phrase that is ambiguous, and the conclusion is reached not by valid logical inference, but by trading on the ambiguity of a key word or phrase. So it can be unconscious the way someone does this, but you could think of many ways you could do it intentionally to trade on the ambiguity of a term in order to argue for the truth of a fallacy, or the truth of a conclusion, which is fallacious. The second one is amphibly, and so it's similar to equivocation, but the double meaning is due to syntactical deficiency, such as a grammatical error or mistake in punctuation. So this is related to especially in written form, related to grammar and form and style. So an amphibly is an inference that is invalid because of its dependence on an ambiguity that is due to sentence structure. And so here's an example. We were disturbed to read in the Times that during the past 5 years, many of the middle school students searched illegally carried firearms. Obviously, they should fire the school administrators for conducting these illegal searches. So we were disturbed to read in the Times that during the past 5 years, many of the middle school students searched illegally carried firearms. Obviously, they should fire the school administrators for conducting these illegal searches. So the way that it's normally structured is the premises contain a sentence that is ambiguous due to faulty structure. So in that past one, the first sentence, the main premise, there seems to be some words that are missing, and therefore it's ambiguous what is being said here. So we were disturbed to read in the Times that during the past 5 years, many of the middle school students were searched, or did they searched illegally carried firearms? Did they search firearms? Were they searched for firearms, where they searched for just illegally carried firearms or illegal firearms. It's unclear. And then you have the premises that contains a sentence that is ambiguous due to faulty structure, and then the conclusion is reached not by valid logical inference, but by trading on structural ambiguity. And so there's some force to it, but it's ambiguous what's really being argued here. And then the next type is composition. So you have two types: an invalid inference from the nature of the parts to the nature of the whole. So you can't argue from parts to whole. Each of the parts of an airplane is very light, therefore the airplane itself is very light. Well, we know that doesn't follow that the airplane itself is very light just because individual parts are, whether it be a bolt or a wing in comparison to the whole plane. And then the second is invalid inference from the attributes of members of a group to attributes of the group itself. So the example would be elephants eat more than humans, so elephants taken as a whole eat more than humans taken as a whole. Well, it doesn't follow. We have billions and billions and billions of humans, and so therefore it could be the case that we actually consume more food than all the elephants in the world, even though they eat more. An elephant eats more than a human individually. And then, so first in composition, you have premises: the parts or members have an attribute X, and then the whole or the group has an attribute X. So from parts to wholes, and that's fallacious. That's a fallacious way to reason. And then in division, it's another type of these fallacies of ambiguity, and that is the airplane is heavy, so each of its parts is heavy. So division's arguing from the whole to the parts. So because the whole airplane is heavy, therefore each of its parts is heavy, which would entail the bolt is heavy as the airplane, and that doesn't follow. The Ravens are an excellent team, therefore each Raven team member is excellent. Well, that doesn't follow, because you're evaluating two different things here: the individual and the group. And so the group can be good as a whole, whereas you could have someone who never is playing a down and is not as excellent as the team as a whole. And so it's the reverse of composition: an invalid inference from the nature of the whole to the nature of the parts, or from the nature of the group to the nature of its members. And that is a fallacious way of reasoning. So the whole or group has an attribute X, and the conclusion is the parts or members have attribute X. So because the group as a whole has this attribute, let's say of excellence or heaviness, the whole airplane, the parts or the members of it have this attribute. Well, that doesn't follow. And then your next big category of informal fallacies is fallacies of presumption or unwarranted assumptions. So fallacies of presumption or unwarranted assumptions. And the first one of fallacies of presumption are mistakes that arise because too much has been assumed in the premises. And you have begging the question, false calls, appeal to unreliable authority, and complex questions. So in begging the question, an example you may have is the defendant is not guilty of the crime, for she is innocent of having committed it. So you're begging the question, you're assuming the point trying to be proved, which, in this case, this example would not work in a court of law, saying the defendant is not guilty because she's innocent of having committed the crime. That is begging the question that's under scrutiny. And then the conclusion repeats the premise, essentially, and it is valid and sound, yet it does not prove or lead to anything new. So you can have arguments that are valid and sound, but does not prove or lead to anything new. And this is related to the content of the argument, not to the structure or the form of the argument. So what's being argued for is being assumed in the premises. To identify a fallacy of begging the question, we need to determine whether each premise taken by itself is better known or more reasonably believed than the conclusion of the argument. So, because that would mean you have a conclusion, your conclusion is strengthened by and supported by the linkage to the premises and the strength and support of the premises and what they offer to the conclusion. So to identify a fallacy of begging the question, you need to try to determine whether each premise taken by itself is better known or more reasonably believed than the conclusion of the argument. That way, the premises are lending support to the strength, lending support to the truth of the conclusion. Next is a false dilemma. I'm tired. So an example could be, I'm tired of all these young people criticizing their own country. What I say is this: America, love it or leave it. And since these people obviously don't want to leave the country, they should love it or stop criticizing it. So it occurs when one uses a premise that unjustifiably reduces the number of alternatives to be considered to just two alternatives, usually. So it's either love America or leave it. But one could love it through seeking to make it better by asking questions about it. There's more than one option here, and it's setting up a false dilemma and to prove a point. We have to specify at least one alternative that has been ignored. If you can point out one alternative that has been ignored in the two alternatives that have been proposed, then you have cut or split the horns of the dilemma, and this can actually be difficult. So in the argument I just gave, it was either love America and don't criticize it, or leave America and you can criticize it. But maybe there's a way to love America and still be critical in a good way. And so that's a possible third way. Sometimes it's called a third way, an alternative that's been ignored. And so you've cut and split the dilemma. And it can be difficult sometimes figuring out what that third option is. You're gonna have to really work at that. Next, you have appeal to unreliable authority. So this is an appeal to authority when the reliability of the authority may be reasonably doubted. So it could be because a lack of experience in a field is cited as an authority. Marketing, ads commonly use this fallacy, appeals to authority, is problematic in controversial matters because experts often disagree. And then next is the false cause fallacy. And so an example could be, since I came into office 2 years ago, the rate of violent crime has decreased significantly. So it is clear that the longer prison sentences we recommended are working. Well, as my professor at New Orleans Seminary used to say often, correlation doesn't equal causation. There is a correlation between the 2-year decrease in violent crime and the 2 years in office of the person in office. But that doesn't mean there's correlation in those. That doesn't mean there's causation in those. You would need to show how one is causing the other. You would need to clearly show that it is the longer prison sentences that have gone into effect in the 2 years that one has been in office, and there's been this decrease, that there's a causal connection between those truths in order to prove it. So you got to be careful. People got to be careful with this, because many times you'll see people, through correlating two things, they will attribute a false cause, and therefore will be committing a false cause fallacy. So it occurs when one possible cause of a phenomenon is assumed to be a or the cause, although reasons are lacking for excluding other possible causes. And so one type of this is called the post hoc ergo propter hoc which means after this, therefore that. So this is more temporal, that this happened, then this happened, there, X happened, then Y happened, therefore X is the cause of Y. So it's more, a temporal progression of one thing following another, and therefore there being a causal link between them. So this would assume that because Y is preceded by X, then X caused Y, or vice versa, depending on the example. So it's more a temporal one after the other correlation that's attributing false causality to something. Another type is non-causa pro cause, literally no cause for a cause. This is a general mistake in an ascription of a cause to an effect. Napoleon became a great emperor because he was short, so attributing a cause just to an effect. So just a very kind of broad connection of a correlation between two facts, that, Napoleon was a great emperor, and that's, a matter of opinion, but let's say Napoleon was a great emperor and Napoleon was short, these two facts, and there's a causal connection just because there's a correlation between them, and that doesn't follow from that. Another classic one is the complex question, and this is a classic one that maybe you've heard used before as an example, is, have you stopped beating your wife? Well, it consists in asking a question that illegitimately presupposes some conclusion alluded to in the question. So what happens is it's pretty much impossible to answer the question without ascribing some truth to what's being asked in the question. So, have you stopped beating your wife? If you say no, then that seems to imply you are beating her. If you say yes, it seems to imply you were beating her. But maybe you never did. So that would probably be the proper answer, is I never have. But that's technically not answering the exact question that's being asked. And so to expose the fallacy of a complex question, one must call into question what it presupposes. So are you still beating your wife? Have you stopped beating your wife? Presupposes that you ever have. So it's just pointing out that presupposition in there and what's being assumed in order to draw that out. So presuppositions are illegitimate when they are unwarranted by the evidence and hence open to reasonable doubt. So who is the King of France? What time is it now? Why is math so boring? Who is the Queen of America? Just dealing with these questions and drawing out what these questions presuppose, whether there is a King of France, whether now has a time. Why is math so boring? Is assuming that math is boring. Because if someone asked you, why is math so boring, you didn't believe it was boring, your answer to that normally would just be, it's not boring, instead of actually answering the question of why it is so boring. Or who is the Queen of America, which assumes there is a queen, which the answer to that question, who is the Queen of America, if one is seeking to speak plainly, they would normally just respond, there isn't a Queen of America, which you're not really answering the exact question, but you are drawing out what it presupposes and stopping the complex question from moving forward. So that's your big informal fallacies. You have, your fallacies of ambiguity, your fallacies of unwarranted or assumed, premises, and you have your fallacies of relevance. So appeals to the people, ad hominem, appeals to the people, arguments against the person, appeals to force, appeal to pity, straw men, ignorance, to go back. And you have your fallacies of ambiguity, which are your equivocation, affibly, and composition and division. And then you have your fallacies of presumption or unwarranted assumptions, which are those fallacies of begging the question, false cause, appeal to unreliable authority, and complex question. So I want you to use these as you do the assignment this week, which is to spot the fallacy exercise and watching the Piers Morgan video and Ryan T. Anderson exchange, and giving me as many as you can see in there in a description. I'm not worried about page length or length of anything in here, but just identifying those fallacies in a document, naming them, and give me the brief example or description of how it was, an example of that fallacy, and then submit that via the portal. And you can also use these fallacies you find in this video. You can use it in your fallacy journal. So keep that document, and you can use that in your end of the semester project of your fallacy journal of collecting examples, one example of each informal fallacy in these three big categories. So, like I said, like I always say, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I'd love to help you out in any way. And I look forward to us getting into more formal propositional logic in the next unit. Have a good day.